There are nights when the universe feels louder than usual, when antennas whisper with static that sounds almost alive. And on the morning of October 8th, 2025, that whisper turned into silence. Screens inside NASA's control rooms flickered, then froze. Transmission lights dimmed. Deep space monitors that had sung in steady rhythm for years suddenly went quiet, as if the cosmos itself had pressed pause. Outside, the world kept turning, unaware that the most advanced scientific network on Earth had just gone dark. It began with a signal from Mars, faint, repeating, impossible to decode. Engineers thought it was interference from solar wind, but the pattern was too deliberate, too organized. Then one word began echoing through private channels and late-night radio chatter alike: Atlas. The third interstellar object ever recorded, the mysterious traveler that no telescope could keep up with. And now, somehow it was there, near Mars, and NASA had just shut down. Tonight, we unfold the quiet panic behind that silence. The story of how an agency built to explore the universe found itself staring into a cosmic blackout. The world goes silent as NASA screens go dark. Inside Mission Control, hums of machinery became the loudest sound in the room. Monitors showed rows of frozen telemetry. Engineers stared, waiting for refresh cycles that never came. When systems as vast as NASA's fall quiet, it's never all at once. It's like watching a constellation vanish star by star. Someone whispered that the Mars link had failed. Another said Houston was fine, it was Pasadena that blinked first. The truth was simpler and stranger. Every deep space line had collapsed within minutes, as if following a cue from somewhere far beyond Earth. The silence wasn't just technical, it was emotional. Scientists train for numbers, not for absence. They know what errors look like, what noise feels like, but nothing prepared them for stillness this complete. In that pause, even the air seemed to hesitate, heavy with the feeling that something enormous had just changed course. Outside the building, dawn broke as usual, unaware that humanity's ear to the cosmos had gone deaf for the first time in decades. A few technicians tried rerouting signals through backup arrays. Nothing. Others rebooted the communication relays with trembling hands. The emergency logs filled with one repeating status line: signal lost, cause unknown. You could almost sense the unspoken question passing through every mind. Was it us? Or was it something out there? Phones began ringing in overlapping tones like alarm bells without rhythm. Department heads moved briskly between stations, pretending control, but you could see doubt in their eyes. Every space agency on Earth looks at NASA when the sky misbehaves. Yet even NASA seemed like a passenger now, waiting for an invisible driver to decide the next turn. And through that uneasy quiet, one word began circling around the control room, whispered first, then spoken louder: Atlas. 2 October 8th, 2025, internal alerts, flood, Houston. The timestamp read 02:17 UTC when the first internal alert reached Houston. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a routine communication anomaly from the Deep Space Network. Engineers see hundreds of those each year. But this one came with a strange pulse signature embedded inside the carrier wave, like a heartbeat beneath the static. Within an hour, more than 50 similar alerts stacked up, all traced back to Mars. The command center's lighting felt too bright for the hour. Sleep-deprived engineers stared at code windows glowing like aquariums. Lines of text scrolled past faster than anyone could read. Then came the second alarm. High-energy interference detected. That line had only appeared once before during a solar flare in 2003. The room temperature seemed to rise by degrees as supervisors called for redundancy checks. But the pattern in the data wasn't random solar noise, It carried symmetry, like music too slow to hear. Someone suggested solar weather. Another whispered cosmic ray burst, yet neither fit. The anomaly had rhythm. 4 pulses, a pause, 4 again. It was almost too human in its precision. A young technician muttered that maybe the system was echoing itself, a feedback loop, but no one could find the source of that loop. Outside Houston, clouds reflected city lights as if waiting for lightning that never came. Inside, the people who measure the universe's breath held theirs. A senior controller finally ordered a full lockdown of the Mars telemetry stream. Better to shut the line than risk contamination of other channels. For a place built on curiosity, hitting the off switch felt like betrayal. But the order went through, and one by one, data feeds dimmed. Somewhere beneath the static, those 4 quiet pulses kept repeating, waiting to be heard again. 3. Data from Mars orbiters vanishes mid-transmission. In California, at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a narrow band of light flickered across a monitor. The feed from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. Halfway through its scheduled transmission, the stream simply melted into noise. No warning, no gradual fade. Just a sudden blank screen followed by a line of gibberish that looked almost handwritten. Technicians replayed the last clean second frame by frame. There was a faint shimmer in the background, like a reflection not meant to be there. One analyst swore he saw a second tail streaking behind the planet, thin, greenish, moving faster than orbit allows, but when they enhanced the image, the artifact vanished, leaving only pixel static. Everyone blamed the software. Secretly, nobody believed it was just software. Within the next 10 minutes, both orbiters around Mars stopped responding. Perseverance still sent short bursts from the surface, but each packet arrived delayed, distorted, as if bent by an invisible field. One engineer compared it to trying to talk underwater. The compression algorithms couldn't make sense of the patterns. Every attempt to decode produced the same strange shape, 2 loops, crossing each other like the symbol for infinity. Meetings started that night. Specialists from radio, plasma physics, and cybersecurity all argued at once. Some said cosmic dust storms could ionize Mars's upper atmosphere enough to block signals. Others pointed out the timing matched the trajectory of 3I Atlas almost perfectly. The thought that an interstellar object could interfere with radio telemetry sounded absurd. Yet the data kept insisting on absurdity. And deep in one unmarked report folder, someone typed the phrase, possible electromagnetic coupling event. No one outside that room would read those words for weeks. 4 engineers scramble as deep space antennas report interference. Thousands of miles away, the giant antennas of the deep space network rose from desert silence like frozen dancers. These dishes are humanity's ears, tuned so finely they can detect a signal weaker than a phone call on Pluto. On October 8th, even they began to stutter. At the Goldstone facility in California, the first technician noticed something odd. The noise floor, the natural background hum of the universe, had tripled. It was as if the cosmos had started whispering louder. Filters designed to block solar interference began to overload one by one. The dish tried to compensate, rotating slightly toward the source, but every correction made the interference worse. Supervisors ordered a realignment toward Jupiter as a control test. Instantly, the signal cleared. Turn back to Mars, and the storm returned, a low oscillation pulsing every 42 seconds. Engineers have a word for that pattern: coherence. It shouldn't happen in random space noise. Coherence means intention, or at least organization. By now, caffeine cups covered every console. External agencies were contacted under classified protocols. Within hours, Canberra and Madrid, the other 2 deep space network hubs, reported the exact same pattern. 3 stations on 3 continents, hearing one impossible heartbeat across 200 million miles of vacuum. They tried adjusting frequencies, narrowing bandwidths, even shutting down sections to isolate the source. Nothing stopped the pulse. It felt less like interference and more like intrusion, something entering through the very systems built to listen. And through all the confusion, a quiet fear grew. Maybe NASA hadn't gone offline. Maybe it had been switched off. 5. The name whispered across control rooms. 3I Atlas. It started as rumor in the corridors, a half-joke between night shift analysts. Atlas is speaking again. But when the files from the Chilean observatory arrived, the laughter stopped. They showed that 3I Atlas, the interstellar object discovered just months earlier, had reached a trajectory that placed it directly behind Mars, perfectly aligned with the Sun-to-Earth communication axis. That meant every signal NASA sent or received from Mars now passed through the electromagnetic wake of an object older than our solar system. For a scientist, that's both a nightmare and a miracle. Nobody knew what kind of field Atlas carried. Its plasma tail stretched millions of kilometers, glowing faint green in spectroscopic data. Some thought it was rich in nickel, others whispered it emitted coherent radio patterns. The same rhythm that was now bleeding into every NASA channel. Inside the closed-door briefing, someone finally said the word everyone had been avoiding. Shutdown. Not as an order, as an acknowledgement. Systems were being overrun with harmonics they couldn't filter out. To protect satellites and servers, NASA had begun quietly powering down segments of its network. The public would see it as maintenance. The engineers knew it was retreat. And still the pattern continued. Soft, persistent, almost polite. 4 pulsed. A pause. 4 again. Some said it was just plasma resonance. Others wondered, almost guiltily, whether the universe had found a way to knock and see who was listening. For months, NASA had warned about an approaching interstellar body that moved unlike anything they had tracked before. Its discovery back in July seemed almost casual, a line of code in the nightly scan from Chile's Atlas survey. Yet every follow-up frame deepened the mystery. The object wasn't orbiting the Sun, it was cutting straight through the solar system like a stone skipping across a pond, hyperbolic, fast, and unpredictable. They called it 3I Atlas, I meaning interstellar. And though it seemed harmless, its trajectory was heading for a close pass with Mars, a planet that by October would become the silent center of the entire scientific world. At first, no one expected trouble. Space is full of wanderers, icy relics that melt, flare, and vanish without consequence. But as Atlas neared Mars's orbit, strange fluctuations began appearing in magnetometer readings from every spacecraft in the region. The numbers danced where they should have stayed flat. It was as though something invisible was brushing across the field lines connecting Mars to the Sun. A ripple, not in gravity but in electricity, the kind of disturbance plasma physicists compare to a plucked string. The question was, what had plucked it? By late September, quiet discussions began behind closed doors. NASA's Theoretical Physics Division had already drafted simulations showing what might happen if a charged interstellar body interacted with the heliospheric current sheet, the giant, rotating electrical skirt that ripples outward from the Sun. Most dismissed the idea as fringe speculation, but when solar wind readings spiked exactly when Atlas crossed that boundary, speculation turned into alarm. The data didn't lie. Something massive, invisible and deliberate-looking was happening between Mars and the Sun. It wasn't the first time science had brushed against the unknown. Decades earlier, Comet Encke had lost its tail during a solar storm, an event once called impossible until cameras caught it live. But this felt different. The timing, the precision, the geometry, all too perfect. Even veteran engineers began to wonder if the universe was orchestrating a test of human comprehension. There's a difference between coincidence and choreography, and for the first time, that difference felt painfully thin. Inside NASA's glass-walled conference rooms, the unspoken thought hovered like static. Are we watching something respond? In one internal memo, the director of heliophysics used a phrase that would later haunt journalists. Possible external influence on electromagnetic structure. It was technical language for an unthinkable idea that Atlas wasn't just passing through, it might be interacting. When data from Mars began to flicker, the theory gained a strange gravity of its own. After all, what better way to test a planet's magnetic resilience than by brushing its field with the tail of an interstellar visitor? The math was brutal, the implications worse, and NASA did what institutions do best when facing the unknowable. They stayed quiet. The object moved faster than prediction models could keep up with. Most comets follow rules obeying light, gravity, and solar heat. Atlas ignored all of them. It accelerated when it shouldn't have, slowed down without cause, and twisted its plasma tail into shapes that defied magnetic logic. Spectral readings showed materials never seen in any comet before, metals and gases that seemed alien even to the oldest formation theories. NASA's computers struggled to simulate its path, spitting out warnings like a stubborn heartbeat. Every adjustment only made the error margin grow. Something about Atlas refused to be defined. In astrophysics, unpredictability is the closest thing to personality, and that's what unnerved everyone, the sense that Atlas behaved, not randomly, but rhythmically. Its emissions came in timed bursts, its outgassing patterns oscillated in repeating intervals. There was symmetry in its chaos. That's when old research began resurfacing. Papers from the 1980s about electromagnetic intelligence within plasma structures, long dismissed as pseudoscience. But now those forgotten pages read less like fantasy and more like early warnings. Maybe energy could organize itself. Maybe the stars had more language than light alone. Mars, meanwhile, drifted into position like a stage light. The geometry was perfect. The Sun, Mars, and Atlas forming a near straight line. And through that alignment flowed the invisible river of the solar current sheet, a vast ocean of charged particles linking everything in the inner solar system. To plasma physicists, that alignment wasn't just beautiful, it was volatile. The possibility of resonance, of two frequencies matching in a single pulse, loomed large. If Atlas carried charge, that resonance could ripple outward, even reaching satellites orbiting Earth. That's exactly when ground antennas began misbehaving. The Canberra Deep Space Network in Australia picked up oscillations that mirrored the frequencies seen at Goldstone days earlier. It was as though the same tone, 42-second intervals, was echoing across half the planet. This wasn't background radiation. It had structure, consistency, almost a sense of design. Operators watched the graphs pulse with eerie precision and realized they were observing not chaos, but coherence. It's a small difference on paper, but in space science, coherence changes everything. As one senior technician put it, when the universe speaks in rhythm, you listen. They didn't know yet that rhythm was about to crescendo. For all their equations and technology, what they were really watching was something ancient. The dance between matter and magnetism, chaos and connection. And in that dance, Atlas led. It didn't announce itself with explosions or signals, but with silence, a silence so structured it almost sounded like thought. Ahead, in this video, we step closer to the moment when NASA realized the silence wasn't absence. It was message. The overload began quietly. A warning light here, a system lag there. By the time technicians realized what was happening, the Mars orbiters had already slipped into automatic safe mode. It's a simple protection mechanism. When instruments sense conditions they can't explain, they shut themselves down before burning out. But for all of NASA's engineering, nobody could explain why half a dozen spacecraft tripped simultaneously. They weren't overheating, they weren't losing power, they were simply overwhelmed, like the sensors were trying to read something too complex to process. Screens filled with cascading error codes, unreadable lines repeating faster than anyone could scroll. On some consoles, the numbers looped, forming patterns that looked eerily symmetrical. Engineers, normally calm, leaned forward, faces lit by the pale glow of failing data. In the noise, a shape began to appear, an oscillating frequency map that looked almost like a waveform trying to stabilize itself. "That's not random," someone whispered. Yet when they tried to isolate the signal, it dissolved as if it didn't want to be caught. Outside, dawn broke over the California desert. The huge radio dishes turned slowly toward the east, hunting for a signal that refused to exist. Every attempt to reconnect triggered another safe mode event. It was as though Mars itself was surrounded by an invisible pressure, not physical but electrical, like the hum before lightning. Scientists debated solar interference, cosmic rays, anything that could justify the unexplainable. But the timing, always the timing, pointed back to one thing: Atlas. Each blackout mirrored its approach, pulse for pulse. Within hours, the official protocol kicked in. All deep space assets not critical to life support systems were to power down temporarily. Temporarily turned into a full 48-hour data blackout. NASA's network went silent by design. They told the public it was a precautionary calibration phase. Inside, people knew it was something else, not fear, but respect. Sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's listening. The agency that taught humanity to speak to the stars had decided to stop talking, if only to hear better. And somewhere between those two choices, silence and sound, lay the truth of what Atlas was doing. It didn't shout, didn't burn brighter, didn't change its orbit. It simply kept moving, humming its quiet pattern through the void. Some said it was coincidence. Others felt it was communication. Either way, NASA had turned off the lights in order to see the dark more clearly. By that evening, rumors began to leak. An internal whistleblower mentioned electromagnetic resonance during a late-night radio interview, and within hours, social media was ablaze. Hashtags like NASA SHUTDOWN and Atlas Signal trended worldwide. Outside the space community, it sounded like a thriller plot. But to those inside, it was exhaustion. Sleep-deprived teams were now working through candlelight and caffeine, juggling data that made no sense. Every time they thought they had isolated the interference, it morphed again, adapting like weather. Journalists called it the quietest panic in history, because officially nothing was wrong. NASA's website still displayed smiling astronauts and educational links, while behind the curtain, the entire Deep Space Division was frozen. Even the Jet Propulsion Lab cafeteria had emptied, replaced by 24-hour task forces. Security teams confiscated personal devices to prevent leaks. Yet still, fragments of truth escaped. Screenshots of frequency logs, blurred images of Mars glowing faintly green, whispers of a pattern too clean to be random. Every fragment fueled more speculation. Then came the first comparison. A veteran scientist reminded reporters of the 2007 Enki CME event, when a comet's tail mysteriously detached after a solar storm. But this wasn't detachment, this was alignment. The Atlas anomaly wasn't chaos, it was order disguised as accident. Old researchers dusted off plasma universe theories once mocked as pseudoscience, suddenly relevant again. Maybe cosmic bodies aren't just passive rocks. Maybe they respond. Maybe space isn't empty after all. In conference rooms, people who'd spent their lives believing in equations began to whisper about patterns, consciousness, and cosmic memory. Nobody dared say intelligence aloud, but everyone thought it. The rhythms matched, the signals echoed, and somewhere in the noise was something that felt deliberate. You could sense it in the faces of the scientists, a mix of wonder and fear that only comes when knowledge steps too close to mystery. Late that night, an unmarked message appeared on the internal communication hub. No sender, no signature, just one line typed in system font. The signal is self-correcting. No one admitted to writing it, but it spread through every floor, screenshots shared like secret prayers, because if the signal could correct itself, it might also be watching who was listening. That realization changed the tone overnight. NASA's focus shifted from why to how. If this was electromagnetic interference, what kind was it? Plasma physicists began mapping the sun's heliospheric current sheet, that vast, rotating spiral of charged particles stretching from the sun to the edges of the solar system. It turns out, during certain alignments, the current sheet brushes Mars like a cosmic wind, and on October 8th of the 2025, Atlas's trajectory sliced directly through it. The math formed an almost perfect intersection. To a casual observer, that might mean nothing, but in plasma terms, it was extraordinary. Imagine two giant rivers of electricity, one solar, one interstellar, meeting in open space. Their currents twist, clash, and harmonize, sometimes amplifying each other into breathtaking energy surges. Those surges can ripple outward across millions of miles, briefly altering magnetic fields of planets, even affecting radio signals. That's what scientists now suspected. Atlas had become a bridge between cosmic systems, connecting two oceans that were never meant to touch. In quiet labs, physicists ran simulations showing plasma filaments stretching from Atlas to Mars, then faintly toward Earth. The computer visuals looked like glowing spiderwebs spanning the void. Skeptics dismissed it as artistic exaggeration. But when the real-time solar wind monitors confirmed the same shape, disbelief turned to silence. For the first time in history, humans were watching two cosmic bodies form a temporary electrical handshake. The data had rhythm, bursts of energy every 42 seconds, each followed by a silence exactly 14 seconds long. These weren't natural ratios, they were harmonic. Musicians recognized the pattern instantly. The structure of octaves. Scientists don't like coincidences shaped like music. It felt as if the universe had its own sense of timing. Someone in the back of the room joked softly, "Maybe we're listening to the universe tune itself." Nobody laughed, they just nodded. From that point, even skeptics grew quiet. Whatever Atlas was, it had synchronized with something deep in the heliosphere. It wasn't collision, it was resonance. And resonance always has two sides, the source and the one that listens back. Soon, whispers turned to theories. A few fringe researchers mentioned an idea called the plasma bridge hypothesis. It proposed that when two electrically charged bodies align within a magnetic field, an invisible plasma filament can form, a kind of luminous tether connecting them. Normally these are microscopic or short-lived, but if Atlas carried enough charge, that bridge could stretch across planetary scales, and if it did, any spacecraft caught between would be bathed in oscillating electromagnetic pressure strong enough to shut down instruments automatically. It was an elegant explanation, terrifyingly elegant, because it meant the blackout wasn't an accident at all. It was physics following its own law, the way storms follow temperature. NASA had unknowingly placed its most advanced explorers right inside the interference zone. The safe mode shutdowns, the radio static, even the harmonic pulses, all of it fit. The universe hadn't broken the rules, it had simply reminded humanity that it wrote them. Within days, small leaks of the theory spread online, often twisted into wilder forms. Some channels claimed the plasma bridge was conscious. Others said Atlas was hollow. NASA predictably said nothing, but inside the agency, quiet respect had replaced panic, the kind that comes when science brushes the edge of awe. Because even if it was just magnetism and plasma, it was behaving like conversation: question, response, pause, question again. In the cafeteria, someone scribbled on a napkin the phrase, "Maybe the silence is part of the signal." It got taped above the coffee machine, staying there long after the event passed. Scientists can't resist poetry when their instruments stop making sense, because deep down, discovery has always been more emotion than math. Wonder is just curiosity meeting something too big to define. And yet, amid all the beauty of the theory, one uncomfortable truth lingered. If this bridge existed, then energy was moving through it. And energy, when it moves, leaves consequences. What exactly was it doing to Mars? That question would soon become the center of everything. The leak that changed everything came from an internal email chain between the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter team and the Deep Space Network administrators. The subject line read, "Subsurface Echo Patterns, Urgent Review." The message contained images that shouldn't exist. Radar scans showing reflective anomalies beneath Mars's surface, perfectly circular, pulsing in sync with the Atlas frequency. They weren't geological, they weren't ice, they were rhythmic. No one dared publish them. A circular formation resonating with an interstellar object would cause chaos in the scientific community. Still, curiosity is stronger than fear. A few analysts began quietly studying the patterns, layering them over solar data, and discovered something spine-chilling. The pulses originated not from Mars but through it, as if energy was entering one side of the planet and exiting the other, like sound passing through a drum. That's when one veteran geophysicist said something that made the room go silent. "We're watching Mars resonate." The word "stuck," resonate. It explained the flickering instruments, the harmonic pulses, even the auroras beginning to appear over Mars's night side. Resonance meant synchronization, and synchronization meant connection. Atlas wasn't just near Mars anymore, it was interacting with it. Every new scan brought stranger results. Subtle shifts in Mars's magnetic poles, faint energy surges recorded by orbiters, even interference in the Perseverance rover's circuitry. The patterns were too orderly to ignore. It felt less like chaos and more like calibration. Some scientists whispered the phrase planetary tuning. No one wrote it down, but everyone felt it. Something out there was setting a rhythm, and Mars had started to hum along. As we open more of this story, the hum grows louder, not just on Mars, but in the deep channels of data streaming toward Earth. Ahead in this video, we step closer to the moment when that hum reached NASA's servers, and the silence turned into a signal no one expected. Solar Cycle 25 was already near its peak when Atlas made its pass. The Sun, restless and radiant, had been firing off coronal mass ejections for weeks, arcs of plasma big enough to swallow worlds. Normally, such activity is routine, a reminder of the star's living pulse. But this time, something was off. Instruments detected a subtle distortion in the heliospheric current sheet, a twisting wave that didn't match solar rotation. It looked as though something had brushed against the Sun's magnetic skin and left a ripple behind. Every model pointed to the same timeline. The disturbance began precisely as Atlas entered Mars's orbit. Inside NASA's heliophysics division, analysts rechecked every solar parameter they could. Solar wind speed, proton density, plasma temperature, all showed rhythmic spikes rising and falling like a slow heartbeat. When plotted on a time axis, the graph revealed something chillingly familiar, the same 42-second interval seen in the Atlas signal. It was as if the sun itself was echoing the visitor's pulse. No one dared suggest it aloud, but you could feel the question hanging in the air. Could an interstellar object really influence the sun? The idea was absurd, and yet the data didn't care about absurdity. To make sense of the phenomenon, the team turned to older, dusty studies on solar system resonance. They found fragments of research describing how small electromagnetic disturbances can propagate through the heliospheric sheet, creating waves that mirror their source's rhythm. If Atlas carried charge, then perhaps its movement through that plasma ocean was enough to send faint echoes all the way to the sun. Not strong enough to change it, but enough to make it listen. It's strange to think of the sun listening, but that's exactly what the graphs look like. Meanwhile, public attention was shifting. Amateur astronomers had begun to notice subtle flickers in solar images, timing them with Atlas's orbit. On social media, threads appeared comparing them to Morse code. NASA avoided comment. Inside, though, quiet astonishment replaced fear. Because if the sun could momentarily respond to a visitor from beyond the stars, it meant space wasn't the vacuum humans once imagined. It was a living, resonant field of energy. And in that field, everything hums together, even if just for a heartbeat. In the silence between data updates, a young researcher typed a line into her logbook that captured the feeling of the room. The universe is playing its own instrument. We just caught one note. None of them realized that note was about to crescendo in ways no equation could predict. As Atlas's plasma tail stretched across millions of kilometers, it began to align perfectly with Mars's orbital plane. This wasn't supposed to happen. Tails are shaped by solar wind, not geometry. Yet telescopic images from Chile and Hawaii confirmed it. Atlas's tail wasn't scattering, it was aiming. Directly along the same path Mars followed around the Sun. The alignment was mathematically elegant, unsettlingly so. When the first analysis came in, it showed the deviation was less than 1 degree, an accuracy no natural phenomenon should have. Scientists who spent their lives measuring chaos suddenly saw choreography. In ancient astronomy, alignment always carried meaning, omens, patterns, destiny. Modern science replaced that with probability. Yet here it was unfolding in real time, as though the cosmos still knew how to compose symmetry. The plasma tail glowed faintly green, rippling with periodic waves. Those waves carried electrons and charged dust, forming what physicists call filamentary current structures. In simpler words, electrical threads connecting objects across space. And in this case, one of those threads now pointed straight at Mars, and by extension, toward Earth. NASA's visual analysts enhanced the images, layering spectroscopic data onto magnetic maps. What they found wasn't light, it was current. Real, measurable current flowing through the tail, carrying both solar and interstellar particles. The readings hinted at a massive energy bridge forming temporarily between Mars and the region surrounding Atlas. The numbers were delicate, barely above noise level, but they matched too perfectly to ignore. One scientist murmured that maybe this was what ancient myths meant by threads of the gods, unseen lines connecting worlds. The agency debated releasing the data. Ultimately, they didn't. The last thing NASA needed was panic or misinterpretation. Instead, they stored the images under a restricted tag, ion filament cross-reference. Outside, telescopes continued to capture the glowing arc, but few understood what they were seeing. To the public, it was just another comet flare. To those inside the room, it was the beginning of something historic. The first visual hint that space itself might behave like circuitry. And if that was true, it meant energy could move along those lines, perhaps carrying not just light or charge, but information. That single possibility changed the conversation completely. Because what if Atlas wasn't just glowing? What if it was transmitting? As debates flared across departments, independent physicists around the world began reviving an old concept, the plasma bridge hypothesis. It proposed that under the right magnetic conditions, two celestial bodies could form a temporary energy conduit, exchanging charge until equilibrium was reached. It sounded poetic, even romantic. Planets touching hands across the void. But if it were true, it could explain everything: the communication blackouts, the harmonic pulses, even the subtle magnetic distortions sweeping through NASA's deep space systems. Laboratories in Germany, Japan, and India started running plasma field simulations. The results were mesmerizing. Virtual tendrils of energy formed spontaneously when two magnetic nodes aligned, just like Atlas and Mars. The connection wasn't constant. It pulsed, breathing in and out like a living lung. The same rhythm, 42 seconds. Scientists no longer argued whether the pattern was coincidence. The bigger mystery was why it existed at all. If the universe has a rhythm, who or what set the tempo? For NASA, that question was too philosophical. They focused on containment. New instructions were sent across the deep space network. Minimize high-gain transmission, avoid directional overlap with the Mars corridor, reroute energy flow through redundant channels. It was the digital equivalent of closing windows before a storm. But storms don't wait for permission. Even as systems went offline, background radiation climbed. The bridge, if it existed, was humming louder than ever. Within hours, observatories recorded faint magnetic fluctuations synchronized across hemispheres. What happened near Mars was rippling through interplanetary space, brushing against Earth's magnetosphere like a feather. Nothing destructive, just a whisper of connection, enough to make compass readings drift by fractions of degrees. Most people would never notice. But those who did felt a quiet wonder, because in all of human history, this was the first moment two worlds might have been electrically linked through the breath of a visitor from another star. Late that night, a senior physicist whispered to a colleague, "Maybe this is what the universe does when it introduces itself." It wasn't a theory, it was a feeling, and feelings sometimes reveal truths numbers can't yet prove. Inside NASA, tension ran high, then came the leak. Someone, perhaps tired of secrecy, forwarded a thread of internal emails to a science journalist. The messages referenced resonant discharge events detected in multiple Mars data streams. Within hours, screenshots were circulating online, sparking both fascination and fear. People wanted answers. NASA issued a brief statement calling it a data synchronization anomaly. But to those who understood the language, that was code for something far stranger. Data doesn't resonate unless energy is crossing systems. The leaked logs showed something even more remarkable. Signals repeating not only from Mars but mirrored faintly in low-orbit satellites around Earth. The time delay matched the distance perfectly, as if the pulse had traveled from Atlas to Mars, then along the current sheet toward Earth. Every new reading seemed to whisper the same unspoken truth. This wasn't a local event. The solar system itself had become part of the experiment, a chain reaction of resonance, subtle but measurable. In a locked conference room, a small team of senior scientists debated what to do. Some argued to shut down all transmissions until the phenomenon passed. Others warned that cutting contact would blind humanity to what might be the most important discovery in cosmic history. The decision fell to one man, quiet and pale under the fluorescent lights. "We keep listening," he said finally. "If the universe is speaking, I want to hear what it says next." The room fell silent. For the first time, the shutdown felt less like fear and more like reverence. Scientists who had spent their lives sending messages outward now waited, humbled, for one to come back. The distinction between exploration and prayer blurred in that dim room full of monitors. Perhaps the two had always been the same thing. And still the signal continued, steady, soft, relentless. 4 pulses, a pause, 4 more. Somewhere out there between Mars and Atlas, the void was humming with impossible harmony, and Earth was part of the choir. Meanwhile, the Mars ground-penetrating radar began returning echoes that made no geological sense. Each scan revealed circular reflections deep below the planet's surface, not caverns, not ice, but something rhythmic. They appeared in clusters, perfectly timed with the Atlas pulse, as though the planet itself had started to breathe. Some called it artifact interference, others a computational glitch. But when multiple orbiters recorded the same anomalies from different angles, coincidence vanished from the equation. Mars was resonating and everyone knew it. The data fascinated seismologists. They'd seen vibration waves from meteor impacts, but this was different, a sustained oscillation that moved through the crust evenly like a heartbeat spreading through stone. Instruments caught faint electromagnetic spikes on the surface, creating tiny electric fields never recorded before. It was as if energy was entering Mars through one hemisphere and exiting through the other, guided by the same rhythm echoing through Atlas's tail. The planet wasn't just reflecting, it was participating. Discussions turned surreal. Could a planet act like a conductor in a cosmic circuit? Could resonance itself create temporary energy patterns resembling consciousness? Of course, no one said that officially, but privately people were asking questions that once belonged to philosophy, not physics. The hum had changed them, softened their skepticism, opened something childlike inside their scientific precision. Discovery had begun to sound a lot like wonder again. In meeting transcripts later released, one line stood out. The planet may not be reacting to Atlas. It may be mirroring it. That single sentence flipped everything. If Mars was mirroring, then Atlas wasn't just an intruder. It was a trigger. It had found a frequency that awakened a dormant resonance already within the planet itself, like striking a key that makes a whole instrument sing. And as that realization sank in, the silence inside NASA turned heavier, not fearful, but sacred. Because if resonance could awaken Mars, what might happen when that same pulse reached Earth? Ahead in this video, we moved toward that moment, when the hum arrived home, and the meaning behind it began to unfold. The first solar flare arrived like a whisper disguised as thunder. On October the 9th, 2025, the Sun released a coronal mass ejection, an expanding halo of plasma that shot outward faster than prediction models allowed. It wasn't the largest flare ever recorded, but it carried a strange signature. Its leading edge pulsed in the same 42-second rhythm as Atlas's emissions. The odds of such synchronization were almost non-existent. Yet there it was, traced clearly in NASA's Solar Observatory data. It was as if the Sun had joined the rhythm, drumming along to a melody no one else could hear. When that flare reached Mars, everything changed. Communication with the Perseverance rover dropped to static. 1 second, telemetry was clear, the next, gone. Engineers tried switching to backup relays, but every attempt failed. The interference wasn't random, it was layered, repeating in harmonic intervals. "It's not noise," one analyst said softly. "It's structure." Some joked about alien Morse code, but the laughter didn't last long. The data was too precise, too symmetrical. The silence that followed felt intelligent, like a pause waiting for a response. NASA issued a public update. Temporary communication loss due to solar interference. It sounded safe, scientific, controlled, but behind closed doors, no one was calm. The agency that had conquered Mars now found itself locked out of it. And for the first time in history, both Earth and Mars had gone quiet under the same invisible rhythm. The alignment between Sun, Mars, and Atlas had become a cosmic metronome, 3 points on a line, beating to one shared pulse. Inside NASA, the usual chatter faded. People spoke in hushed tones as if noise might disrupt the fragile frequency surrounding them. Deep inside the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a systems engineer whispered, "It's like someone turned space into a song." The line made it into a report, then disappeared from the official record, but those who read it never forgot. It was the first time anyone had described the event not as a malfunction, but as a form of communication. And somewhere, billions of miles away, Atlas continued on its path, spinning slowly through the light of the sun, leaving behind a glowing bridge of plasma connecting worlds that had never touched before. When contact with Perseverance failed, NASA did what it always does, initiate emergency protocols. The command was simple: shut down all non-essential transmissions and preserve core systems. Across multiple antennas, power indicators dimmed one by one, like city lights fading before a storm. The phrase non-essential echoed uneasily through the control rooms. What counts as essential when you're talking to another planet? For a few moments, humanity's voice on Mars vanished completely. And in that silence something strange stirred, an almost spiritual awareness of how small and connected everything truly was. Engineers worked through the night, rerouting data through backup relays, but even those channels began to flicker. It wasn't just communication that was faltering, it was coordination. Clocks between NASA's systems and Mars orbiters began to drift out of sync. Time itself, or at least how we measured it, started bending to the rhythm of the signal. That discovery shook everyone. Time synchronization is sacred in space science, yet now every clock seemed to hum with the same subtle interval. 42 seconds, the universe was marking its own time. Physicists debated whether cosmic radiation could somehow influence atomic clocks. It shouldn't be possible. Atomic decay rates are constant. But in one experiment, they weren't. A lab in Germany recorded a measurable fluctuation matching the same interval seen across NASA's data. It was like a heartbeat echoing across continents, impossible yet undeniable. The term coherent interference entered reports, replacing malfunction. The narrative had shifted. This wasn't failure, it was participation. The cosmos was syncing and Earth was beginning to join the rhythm. When data logs were reviewed, an anomaly appeared. In the middle of static, Perseverance had sent one last incomplete packet, a cluster of binary code that, when converted to an image, resembled overlapping rings. Not circles, rings nested like ripples in a pond. They matched the shape of the plasma wave surrounding Atlas. Coincidence? Maybe. Or reflection. Either way, the rover had recorded something right before silence fell. And in that stillness, it felt like the universe had taken a breath, waiting for what came next. Outside, Mars shone brighter than usual that night, tinted faintly green under the solar storm. No telescope could explain why, but those who saw it said it looked alive, like the planet had opened its eyes for the first time. While NASA scrambled to recover, observatories around the world started recording magnetic fluctuations unlike anything seen before. From Iceland to Chile, instruments captured the same pattern, a faint, repeating hum in the ionosphere. It wasn't strong enough to disrupt electronics, but it was synchronized perfectly with Atlas's pulse. Everywhere they looked, the numbers danced to the same cosmic rhythm. Scientists from unrelated disciplines, geophysicists, radio engineers, even oceanographers, began finding the same periodic echoes buried in their data. The pattern was global. It started to feel like Earth itself was vibrating in sympathy. Compass needles drifted a fraction of a degree, birds migrated along odd routes, and some people reported hearing a low-frequency hum at night, like distant thunder that never stopped. Governments denied any connection, calling it atmospheric distortion. But online, theories exploded. Some said it was a resonance wave traveling through the magnetosphere. Others insisted it was the planet tuning to Atlas's frequency, just as Mars had done days earlier. At first, NASA dismissed the notion, but then the European Space Agency confirmed identical readings from their magnetometers. The amplitude was tiny, barely measurable, but the timing was exact. The same pulse traveling through multiple planets across millions of miles, maintaining perfect coherence. The implications were staggering. Was this how the universe shared energy between worlds? Or was it something deeper, an unspoken language written in electromagnetic waves? No one could say for sure. In a small corner of NASA's control room, a physicist named Dr. Elena Mora left a note in her personal journal. If this is resonance, it means we're part of the same field. Maybe we always were, and Atlas just made us hear it. She underlined the last sentence twice. That note would later be found and quoted in a classified debrief years later, after most of the data had been sealed away. And while scientists debated, something beautiful unfolded over Mars, the first images of a faint green aurora glowing across its night side, like a heartbeat painted in light, pulsing to the same rhythm. The cosmos was speaking in colors now. The images came from an amateur observatory in Australia, a faint shimmer on Mars's dark hemisphere. At first, it was dismissed as camera error. But when the same glow appeared in data from the Mars Express orbiter, disbelief turned to awe. The color was distinct, unlike typical auroras caused by solar wind. This one flickered in rhythmic bursts, soft emerald fading to silver. The timing, 42 seconds on, 14 off, the same cosmic heartbeat. The pattern had moved beyond data. It was visible now, written in light. NASA's analysts processed the footage frame by frame. What they saw wasn't random. Each pulse formed a spiral shape, faint but unmistakable, rotating counterclockwise. It looked organic, like a fingerprint etched across a planet's sky. Someone whispered that maybe the universe had left its signature. Another said it was just physics, a charged particle cascade, but deep down, no one believed that. The alignment, the color, the timing, it all felt intentional, like the cosmos painting with purpose. Publicly, NASA stayed quiet. Privately, every department was active 24/7, meetings filled with exhausted faces and quiet wonder. Data specialists who'd spent careers studying chaos were now describing beauty. It's rare to hear scientists use words like grace, but that's what they said. The aurora had grace. It wasn't chaos at all. It was composition, something intelligent in structure if not in source. It was as though the sky itself was listening and answering. Meanwhile, ordinary people began capturing the glow through telescopes. The internet filled with side-by-side images comparing the aurora's spiral pattern to Atlas's plasma tail. They matched almost perfectly, like mirror reflections across space. Some called it coincidence, others called it contact, but no one could deny what they were seeing. Mars wasn't just reacting, it was resonating, glowing in rhythm with a visitor from beyond our solar system. And far from the headlines, inside a dim NASA lab, one tired engineer whispered, "We always wanted proof we weren't alone." Maybe this is what it looks like. Not another species, but another kind of awareness. The room fell silent again, filled not with fear, but reverence. By now, the pattern had become impossible to dismiss. Radiation spikes, auroras, synchronized rhythms, it all pointed to one thing, a connection between Atlas, Mars, and the Sun itself. Data from deep space probes showed energy waves moving through the solar wind like ripples in a pond. But these ripples carried structure, Their waveforms were mathematical, harmonic, intentional. Even skeptics started calling it a signal, if only for convenience. The term stuck. Scientists began mapping the wave as if decoding a language written in light and magnetism. They noticed something fascinating. Each cycle of the pulse wasn't identical. The amplitude fluctuated slightly, forming a pattern within the pattern, a meta-rhythm, as if the signal were evolving over time. Machine learning models trained to detect artificial transmissions flagged the dataset as non-random with adaptive characteristics. In plain English, it was learning, or at least changing. The deeper they listened, the more it felt alive. Within NASA's archives, an internal memo described the phenomenon as structured electromagnetic feedback. The idea was simple yet mind-bending. Atlas's field might be interacting with solar plasma in a self-sustaining loop, like a musical note echoing through a cathedral. Only this cathedral was the solar system itself. Every reflection amplified a little more, spreading coherence wherever it went. Harmony replacing chaos, one pulse at a time. Still, some scientists resisted the wonder. They argued it was just physics, complex but natural. Yet others couldn't shake the feeling that the pattern carried meaning. Every time it repeated, it left subtle shifts in the solar wind, as though saying something softly, patiently. One analyst described it as listening to a heartbeat through miles of glass. And then came the strangest discovery of all. When researchers overlapped the wave data with ancient mathematical constants, phi, pi, Fibonacci, they found near-perfect correlation. The signal wasn't just repeating, it was following nature's deepest ratios. Beauty had entered the data, and science had no vocabulary for that kind of elegance. When the lights inside NASA finally flickered back to life, the silence that had stretched across two worlds began to fade. Servers rebooted, consoles hummed, the endless scroll of data returned. But something had changed. The signals coming in from Mars were no longer noise. They carried shape. Tiny rhythmic bursts hidden within the static, repeating at intervals that matched the heartbeat of Atlas. Engineers leaned close, afraid to breathe. It was as if the cosmos had waited for humanity to quiet down long enough to let it speak. And now, it finally was. The first thing they noticed was symmetry. Sequences that looked like data, but too beautiful to be random. Patterns that folded over themselves like the wings of a butterfly, each pulse echoing a mathematical ratio known to nature since the dawn of creation. No one dared say message, but everyone felt it. The readings weren't just numbers, they were music. They were light, translated into rhythm. Something ancient, precise, and utterly indifferent to human comprehension. Yet somehow, it felt gentle. Not intrusion, but invitation. A cosmic nod between intelligence and curiosity. As the data stabilized, new images formed, faint geometric waves appearing in the telemetry from Mars's orbit. Spirals within spirals, drawn in plasma and magnetism, reflecting the same Fibonacci spirals found in seashells, galaxies, and DNA. It was as if the universe had whispered, "This is the language we all share." For a moment, the line between science and spirituality dissolved. People stopped being scientists and started being witnesses. Because sometimes the greatest discovery isn't proof of life elsewhere, but proof that life itself was always connected to something more vast. NASA never called it contact. Officially, they described it as a coherent electromagnetic coupling event. But those who were there, those who saw the rhythm, who felt the hush inside the control rooms, they remembered it differently. They described it as an awakening, not a breakthrough in technology, but a breakthrough in awareness. Humanity's instruments had finally tuned themselves to the same note the universe had been playing since time began. For a heartbeat, everything was in harmony. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the rhythm faded, the pulses quieted, the auroras dimmed. Atlas drifted farther from Mars, its glow softening into the black. NASA's screen stabilized, filled with ordinary data again. The world moved on, but something deep inside those who listened that night stayed changed forever. Because once you've heard the universe breathe, or once you've felt it answer back, silence never feels like emptiness again. It feels like waiting. When the lights inside NASA finally flickered back to life, the silence that had stretched across two worlds began to fade. Servers rebooted, consoles hummed, the endless scroll of data returned. But something had changed. The signals coming in from Mars were no longer noise. They carried shape, tiny rhythmic bursts hidden within the static, repeating at intervals that matched the heartbeat of Atlas. Engineers leaned close, afraid to breathe. It was as if the cosmos had waited for humanity to quiet down long enough to let it speak. And now it finally was. The first thing they noticed was symmetry. Sequences that looked like data, but too beautiful to be random. Patterns that folded over themselves like the wings of a butterfly, each pulse echoing a mathematical ratio known to nature since the dawn of creation. No one dared say message, but everyone felt it. The readings weren't just numbers, they were music. They were light, translated into rhythm. Something ancient, precise, and utterly indifferent to human comprehension. Yet somehow it felt gentle. Not intrusion, but invitation. A cosmic nod between intelligence and curiosity. As the data stabilized, new images formed, faint geometric waves appearing in the telemetry from Mars's orbit. Spirals within spirals, drawn in plasma and magnetism, reflecting the same Fibonacci spirals found in seashells, galaxies, and DNA. It was as if the universe had whispered, "This is the language we all share." For a moment, the line between science and spirituality dissolved. People stopped being scientists and started being witnesses, because sometimes the greatest discovery isn't proof of life elsewhere, but proof that life itself was always connected to something more vast. NASA never called it contact. Officially, they described it as a coherent, electromagnetic coupling event. But those who were there, those who saw the rhythm, who felt the hush inside the control rooms, they remembered it differently. They described it as an awakening. Not a breakthrough in technology, but a breakthrough in awareness. Humanity's instruments had finally tuned themselves to the same note the universe had been playing since time began. For a heartbeat, everything was in harmony. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the rhythm faded, the pulses quieted, the auroras dimmed. Atlas drifted farther from Mars, its glow softening into the black. NASA's screen stabilized, filled with ordinary data again. The world moved on. But something deep inside those who listened that night stayed changed forever. Because once you've heard the universe breathe, once you've felt it answer back, silence never feels like emptiness again. It feels like waiting.